A girl holds her doll in 1912, but the gaze in the background captured in the photo left. Historians, horrified. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and felt that something wasn't quite right? Today, I'm going to tell you about a seemingly innocent portrait from 1912 that has haunted historians and researchers for decades. A young girl, her beloved doll, and a mysterious gaze captured in the background that defies explanation. What you're about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew about early photography. Before we dive into this chilling mystery, if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The morning fog still clung to the streets of Boston as Margaret Whitmore carefully sorted through the estate sale items at the old Beacon Hill mansion. It was October 2019, and the historic three-story brownstone had finally been put up for sale after sitting empty for nearly 2 decades. As the lead archivist for the Boston Historical Society, Margaret had been called in to catalogue any items of historical significance before the property changed hands. The mansion had belonged to the Ashford family since 1889, and the current sale included everything from Victorian furniture to boxes of personal effects that hadn't been touched in years. Margaret's gloved hands moved methodically through stacks of yellow documents, faded receipts, and bundles of letters tied with ribbon that had long lost its color. It was in the 3rd hour of her work, deep in the mansion's musty attic, that she found the photograph. Tucked between the pages of a leather-bound journal, the sepia-toned image seemed unremarkable at first glance. The photograph showed a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, seated on an ornate chair. She wore a white dress typical of the early 1910s, with delicate lace trim and pearl buttons. In her arms she clutched a porcelain doll, dressed in a miniature version of her own outfit. Margaret was about to set the photograph aside with the others when something made her pause. She held it closer to the lamp she'd brought up to the dimly lit attic. The girl's expression was serene, almost dreamy, but there was something else in the image. In the background, partially obscured by what appeared to be heavy curtains, was another face. The archivist's breath caught in her throat. The face in the shadows wasn't looking at the camera like the girl. Instead, the eyes were fixed directly on the child, with an intensity that made Margaret's skin crawl. The features were indistinct, blurred by the photograph's age and the darkness of the background, but the eyes were unmistakably clear and focused. Margaret fumbled for her magnifying glass, her hands suddenly unsteady. Under magnification, the background figure became even more unsettling. It appeared to be a woman, though the features were gaunt and the expression was one of profound anguish or rage. It was difficult to tell which. What was certain was that this was no accidental photobomb. The figure was deliberately positioned, watching the child with an intensity that seemed to burn through the centuries. "Dr. Whitmore?" A voice from below startled her. It was James, her assistant, calling up the narrow attic stairs. "Everything all right up there?" Margaret realized she'd been holding her breath. "Yes, James. Could you come up here for a moment? I need a second opinion on something." As James's footsteps echoed up the wooden stairs, Margaret turned the photograph over. In faded ink, someone had written, "Eleanor Ashford, age 7, with Lily, May 15th, 1912. Mother watches over." But when James examined the photograph, his reaction was immediate. "Jesus, Margaret, who is that in the background? That can't be her mother. Look at those eyes." They spent the next hour going through the journal where the photograph had been hidden. The entries were written in a careful feminine hand, presumably by Eleanor's mother, Catherine Ashford. Most entries were mundane, records of social calls, household management, children's ailments and achievements. But the entries around May 1912 told a different story. May 10th, 1912. Eleanor continues to speak to her imaginary friend. Dr. Morrison assures me this is normal for a child her age, though I find her intensity troubling. May 13th, 1912. The photographer will come Thursday for Eleanor's birthday portrait. She insists Mary must be in the picture too. I've agreed to let her position her doll however she wishes. May 15th, 1912. The portrait session was unsettling. Eleanor kept turning to speak to the corner of the room. Mr. Hartwell, the photographer, seemed eager to finish and leave. Eleanor was perfectly behaved, but she kept whispering to someone none of us could see. May 20th, 1912. Mr. Hartwell delivered the photographs today. I cannot bring myself to look at them again. There is something in that image that turns my blood cold. Eleanor, however, is delighted. She says Mary is so pretty in the picture. If you're enjoying this mystery so far, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Margaret and James exchanged glances. The journal entries continued sporadically after that date, but Catherine Ashford's tone grew increasingly distressed. She wrote of cold spots in the house, of Eleanor's conversations with Mary becoming more frequent and more disturbing. By August 1912, the entries stopped altogether. News of the mysterious photograph spread quickly through the historical community. Within a week of Margaret's discovery, experts from across New England had requested to examine the image. The Boston Historical Society decided to form a formal investigation team, bringing together historians, photography experts, and even a psychologist who specialized in early 20th century childhood development. Dr. Richard Henley, a renowned expert in early photography techniques from Harvard, was the first to conduct a technical analysis. In the Society's laboratory, he carefully examined the photograph under various lights and magnifications. His initial report was thorough but puzzling. The photograph is authentic to the period, he explained to the assembled team. The albumin print process, the paper quality, the chemical composition of the image, everything checks out. This was definitely taken in 1912, give or take a year. But here's where it gets interesting. He projected an enlarged image of the photograph onto the screen, focusing on the mysterious figure in the background. This figure shows signs of what we call motion blur, which was common in early photography due to long exposure times. Subjects had to remain perfectly still for several seconds, but look at the child. She's crystal clear, not a hint of movement. Margaret leaned forward. So the background figure was moving during the exposure? That's just it, Dr. Henley continued. For this level of blur, the figure would have had to be moving quite deliberately, almost swaying. But the strangest part is the eyes. Despite the motion blur affecting the rest of the face and body, the eyes are perfectly sharp. It's as if they remained fixed on the child throughout the entire exposure. The team spent days poring over historical records, trying to identify who might have been in the room during the photography session. The photographer, Mr. Hartwell, had left detailed records of his appointments, now housed in the Massachusetts Historical Commission. According to his logs, the session at the Ashford Mansion on May 15, 1912, was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. and lasted approximately 1 hour. 3 plates exposed, his notes read. Difficult session, child distracted, mother anxious. Unusual atmosphere in the home. Second plate shows best composition, child finally still. Peculiar shadows in background, possibly from curtains movement. Client satisfied despite my reservations. Dr. Sarah Brennan, the child psychologist on the team, offered her perspective. Imaginary friends are indeed common in children, especially only children or those who've experienced trauma. What's unusual here is the mother's reaction and the physical manifestation in the photograph. She had been reviewing census records and newspaper archives. Eleanor Ashford was not an only child originally. She had an older sister, Mary, who died in 1910 from scarlet fever. She would have been about 5 when Mary passed. The room fell silent. Margaret was the first to speak. The imaginary friend's name was Mary. She was talking to her dead sister. It appears so, Dr. Brennan continued. What's particularly interesting is that I found Mary's death certificate. She died on May 15, 1910, exactly 2 years before this photograph was taken. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. The investigation expanded. The team interviewed elderly residents who might have known the Ashford family, searched through newspaper archives, and even brought in experts in optical illusions and photographic anomalies. Each avenue of investigation seemed to deepen the mystery rather than solve it. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, aged 94, was located in a nursing home in Cambridge. Her grandmother had been a maid in the Ashford household from 1908 to 1913. Though Mrs. Chen's memory was fragmented, she recalled stories her grandmother had told. "Grandmother was always frightened of that house after the older girl died," Mrs. Chen said, her voice thin but clear. "She said the little one, Eleanor, would have tea parties with empty chairs, full conversations with the air. But after that photograph was taken, Grandmother said things got worse. The house turned cold, servants started leaving. The mother, Mrs. Catherine, she fell ill." The team discovered that Catherine Ashford had indeed been admitted to a sanatorium in September 1912, suffering from what was described as nervous exhaustion. She never returned home. Eleanor was sent to live with relatives in New York, and the Beacon Hill mansion was closed up. Harold Ashford, the father, died in 1915, and the house had changed hands several times since, though no family had ever lived there for more than a few years. As autumn turned to winter, the investigation took on a more urgent quality. The photograph had been digitally scanned and enhanced, revealing details that were invisible to the naked eye. The enhancement team at MIT's Media Lab had volunteered their services, intrigued by the technical challenge the image presented. "We've isolated approximately 17 distinct layers in the photograph," explained Dr. Michael Torres, the lead technician. "What's fascinating is that the anomalous figure appears to exist on multiple layers simultaneously, which should be impossible with the single exposure technique used in 1912. The enhanced images revealed something even more disturbing. In the original photograph, only one mysterious figure was visible in the background. But the digital enhancement revealed suggestions of other forms, faint outlines that seemed to surround the child. They were barely perceptible, like shadows of shadows, but once seen, they couldn't be ignored. Margaret had taken it upon herself to trace Eleanor Ashford's life after she left Boston. The trail led to New York, where Eleanor had lived with her aunt and uncle, the Weatherbys, in their Upper East Side mansion. Records showed that Eleanor had attended the prestigious Brearley School, graduated in 1923, and married a banker named Thomas Hartman in 1927. But when Margaret tried to find more recent records, she hit a wall. Eleanor Hartman seemed to have vanished from public records after 1935. No death certificate, no obituary, no mention in society pages that had previously documented her every move. It was James who made the breakthrough. He had been corresponding with a genealogist in Switzerland and discovered that Eleanor Hartmann had emigrated there in 1936, settling in a small village outside Zurich. More remarkably, according to Swiss records, she was still alive. "That's impossible," Margaret said, calculating quickly. "She'd be 114 years old." 115, actually, James corrected. "But the records are clear. Eleanor Hartmann, née Ashford, resident of Sonnenhof Care Facility, Winterthur, Switzerland." The team debated whether to attempt contact. The ethical implications were significant. Should they disturb a woman who had clearly fled her past? But the opportunity to speak with the subject of the photograph was too valuable to pass up. Margaret and Dr. Brennan flew to Switzerland in early December. The Sonnenhof facility was a pristine, modern building overlooking snow-covered alpine foothills. The director, Dr. Hans Müller, was skeptical, but eventually agreed to ask Mrs. Hartmann if she would receive visitors. She is quite lucid for her age, he explained in accented English, but she rarely speaks of her childhood. In fact, she has explicitly requested that she never be asked about her time in America. To everyone's surprise, Eleanor agreed to meet them, with one condition: they must bring the photograph. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. Eleanor Hartman was tiny, bird-like, but her eyes were sharp and clear, the same eyes from the photograph, though now set in a face mapped with over a century of living. She sat in a wheelchair by a window overlooking the mountains, her hands folded in her lap. When Margaret produced the photograph, Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened imperceptibly. "I knew someone would come eventually," she said, her voice stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "I've been waiting." She took the photograph with steady hands and studied it for a long moment. "You want to know about Mary?" It wasn't a question. Eleanor's story unfolded slowly, with long pauses where she seemed to be gathering strength or perhaps choosing her words carefully. She spoke of her sister Mary, 2 years older and her best friend. When Mary died, 7-year-old Eleanor had been inconsolable. "Children process grief differently than adults expect," Eleanor said. "I didn't cry. I simply refused to accept that Mary was gone. I kept talking to her, playing with her, saving her place at the table. Mother was beside herself." She explained that her conversations with Mary had felt entirely real to her. Mary would tell her things: where to find lost items, what Mother was thinking, who was at the door before anyone knocked. "The day of the photograph, Mary was upset," Eleanor continued. "She didn't want her picture taken. She said it would trap her. I insisted. I wanted to remember her forever. I positioned my doll where Mary usually sat during our tea parties and told her to stand behind me so she'd be in the picture too. If you're still watching and enjoying this mystery, please like and subscribe to support the channel." "But you couldn't see her?" Dr. Brennan asked gently. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "I could always see her. It was everyone else who couldn't, until the photograph." She described the chaos that followed the photograph's development: her mother's breakdown, the servants leaving, her father's increasing absence. "The house had become cold," she said, "and Mary had changed. She wasn't my sweet sister anymore. She was angry. She said the photograph had done something to her, made her visible when she wasn't supposed to be. Other things started appearing too, things that had been there all along but hidden." Margaret leaned forward. "What kind of things?" Eleanor was quiet for so long they thought she wouldn't answer. "The dead," she finally said. "All of them. The house was full of them, had always been full of them. But the photograph had torn something, made a hole. They could push through." She explained that her mother had seen them too, which led to her breakdown. The servants fled. Her father drank himself into an early grave, and 5-year-old Eleanor was sent away, told never to speak of what happened. "But they followed me," Eleanor said. "Not Mary, she stayed with the photograph, but the others. I learned to ignore them, to build walls in my mind. I married, tried to have a normal life, but they were always there, at the edges. When my husband died, I came here. The mountains help. The cold keeps them quiet." She handed the photograph back to Margaret. "You shouldn't have brought this. They know where it is now. They've always known, but now they know someone's looking." The flight back to Boston was turbulent in more ways than one. Margaret couldn't shake Eleanor's words, while Dr. Brennan was already working on a psychological framework to explain the elderly woman's narrative. But both women were unsettled by the conviction in Eleanor's voice and the specificity of her memories. Back at the Historical Society, they found the investigation had taken an unexpected turn. Dr. Henley had discovered something troubling in his continued analysis of the photograph. Using a new spectral imaging technique, he had found what appeared to be additional figures in the photograph, not just the one visible to the naked eye, but several others, each fainter than the last. "It's as if they're layered," he explained, his usual scientific detachment wavering. Each figure seems to be at a different distance, creating an almost three-dimensional effect that should be impossible with 1912 technology. More disturbing were the reports from the Beacon Hill mansion. The current owners, who had been cooperating with the investigation, called Margaret in a panic. They had been experiencing what they described as disturbances since the photograph had been removed from the house. Cold spots that moved through the rooms. Mrs. Patricia Vance explained over the phone, her voice shaky. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. And my daughter, she's been talking to someone who isn't there. She calls her Mary. The Vance family moved out within a week, staying with relatives. They weren't the first. Margaret's research revealed that no family had successfully lived in the house for more than 3 years since the Ashfords left. There had been reports of strange occurrences dating back decades. Unexplained sounds, cold spots, and always children claiming to see a girl in old-fashioned clothes. The investigation team reconvened, now expanded to include a physicist specializing in electromagnetic fields and a historian who had written extensively on New England folklore. The physicist, Dr. James Wright, had a theory that challenged everyone's assumptions. What if we're looking at this all wrong, he proposed. We're assuming the photograph captured something supernatural. But what if the act of photography itself created the anomaly? He explained his theory, the specific combination of chemicals used in early photography, the electromagnetic properties of the silver in the plates, the particular conditions in the house that day. All of it might have created what he called a temporal impression. Think of it like a recording, he said, but instead of capturing sound, it captured something else. An emotional resonance, perhaps, or an electromagnetic signature. The death of a child in that house, the surviving sibling's grief, the mother's distress. All of it could have created an energy pattern that the photographic process somehow crystallized. It was Dr. Brennan who pointed out the flaw in his theory. That doesn't explain Eleanor's ongoing experiences, or the reports from every family who's lived in that house. As winter deepened, the team found themselves divided. The scientists looked for rational explanations, optical illusions, mass hysteria, the power of suggestion. The historians dug deeper into the house's history, finding that the land had a dark past even before the Ashfords. The site had been a potter's field in the 1700s, a burial ground for the poor and unknown. Construction records from 1889 showed that workers had unearthed numerous unmarked graves. Margaret found herself caught between worlds. Her training told her to seek factual, documentable explanations, but the evidence was mounting that something genuinely inexplicable was connected to the photograph. The breaking point came in January. Margaret had been keeping the photograph in a climate-controlled safe at the Historical Society. She arrived one morning to find the safe door ajar, though the security system showed no breach. The photograph was still there, but it had changed. The mysterious figure in the background was clearer now, as if it had moved closer, and there were definitely other figures visible, faint but undeniable. The child in the photograph, Eleanor, seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable, surrounded by watching shadows. Margaret called Dr. Henley immediately. His analysis confirmed what her eyes told her. The photograph was changing. It should have been impossible. The chemical processes that created the image had been fixed for over a century. But comparative analysis with the digital scans taken months earlier showed definite alterations. It's not degradation, Dr. Henley said, his voice hollow. If anything, certain elements are becoming more defined. It's as if the image is still developing, over 100 years later. That night, Margaret made a decision. She called Eleanor in Switzerland. "You have to tell me the truth," she said. "All of it. What really happened in that house?" Eleanor's voice over the international connection was thin, but steady. "I told you the truth, but not all of it. Mary didn't die from scarlet fever. That's what they told everyone. She fell down the stairs. But I saw what pushed her." Margaret's hand tightened on the phone. "What pushed her?" "The others. The ones who were there before us. The ones from the ground beneath the house. They didn't want us there. Mary could see them, like I could after she died. She tried to warn Mother, but no one believed her. They pushed her to make her stop talking. And the photograph? I told you. It tore something, made a hole between their world and ours. But here's what I didn't tell you. It wasn't an accident. I knew what would happen. Mary told me. She said if we could capture them in the photograph, everyone would have to believe. Everyone would see what we saw. Margaret felt cold despite the warm office. You did it on purpose. I was 7 years old and my sister was dead. Eleanor's voice hardened. I wanted proof. I wanted everyone to see what killed her. I didn't understand that seeing them would make them stronger, that the photograph would become a doorway they could use. How do we stop it? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. You don't. You can destroy the photograph. But the door is open now, has been for over a century. The house knows. They know. All you can do is what I did, leave, go far away and never look back. But it was too late for that advice. By February, the story of the Ashford photograph had leaked to the media. Despite the Historical Society's attempts to control the narrative, sensationalized versions appeared online, in podcasts, and even in a Netflix documentary pitch. Ghost hunters descended on Beacon Hill. The current owners of the Ashford mansion were inundated with requests for access. Margaret watched the circus unfold with growing dread. Each new person who saw the photograph reported strange experiences. A journalist from the Boston Globe claimed to have captured EVP recordings in the Historical Society's archives. A photographer doing a story on the investigation found that all his digital images were corrupted, showing strange distortions and shadow figures that hadn't been visible through the viewfinder. The investigation team met one last time in early March. The photograph had continued to change. The background figures were now clearly visible, 5, maybe 6 forms surrounding the child. Eleanor's expression in the photograph, previously serene, now showed a hint of fear, or perhaps that was just what viewers projected onto it. Dr. Wright presented his final findings. The electromagnetic readings around the photograph were unlike anything he'd seen. The temperature in its vicinity was consistently 3 degrees cooler than the surrounding area. Most unsettling, the readings showed patterns that seemed to respond to observation, changing when someone looked at the photograph directly. I've exhausted every scientific explanation, he admitted. Either we're dealing with an elaborate hoax that spans over a century, or we're confronting something that challenges our understanding of reality. Dr. Brennan had spent weeks analyzing the psychological impact on everyone involved in the investigation. Mass hysteria doesn't explain the physical evidence, she said, but neither does any psychological framework I'm aware of. What's particularly interesting is that children seem more susceptible to whatever influence the photograph exerts. Every family that's lived in the Ashford house reported their children seeing things first. Margaret made the executive decision to return the photograph to the Ashford mansion. The current owners had already decided to sell, planning to market it as a historic property with character. Real estate speak for haunted, but we can't legally say that. On a grey March afternoon, Margaret and James returned to the Beacon Hill mansion. The house felt different now, colder despite the spring warmth outside. They placed the photograph back where Margaret had found it, in the attic, tucked into the same journal. As they turned to leave, James grabbed Margaret's arm. Look, in the dusty attic window, reflected in the old glass, was a face. A young girl, perhaps 9 or 10, with dark hair and a white dress. She wasn't looking at them, but at something behind them. They turned, but the attic was empty. When they looked back at the window, she was gone. They left the house quickly, not speaking until they were blocks away. That night, Margaret submitted her final report to the Historical Society. She recommended that the photograph remain undisturbed, that the investigation be closed, and that no further inquiries be made. But she kept one detail out of her report. As they had replaced the photograph in the journal, she had seen that new writing had appeared on the back in the same faded ink as the original inscription. Below, "Mother watches over," were two new words. "We all do." The Ashford mansion sold 6 months later to a developer who planned to convert it to luxury condos. The renovation never happened. Workers reported tools moving on their own, unexplained accidents, and several claimed to see a young girl who warned them to leave. The project was abandoned. The photograph presumably remains in the attic, waiting. The Historical Society officially closed the investigation, filing it under unexplained historical anomalies. Margaret left her position soon after, taking a teaching job at a small college in Oregon. She never spoke publicly about the investigation, but sometimes, usually on quiet nights, she wondered about Eleanor, still alive in her Swiss mountain retreat, keeping her vigil against things that lurked at the edges of perception. She wondered about Mary, the girl who died and yet remained. Most of all, she wondered about the others. The shadows in the photograph that grew clearer with each viewing, the watching figures that suggested death was not the barrier everyone assumed it to be. The truth was, they never found a rational explanation. The photograph defied every attempt at scientific analysis. It remained what it had always been, a window into something that shouldn't exist, a moment frozen in time that refused to stay still, a mystery that deepened with every attempt to solve it. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some images, once captured, take on a life of their own. And sometimes the most terrifying realization isn't that the supernatural exists, but that it has always been there, watching, waiting for someone to finally see it. In Boston's Beacon Hill, in a dusty attic, a photograph waits. The girl still holds her doll. The shadows still watch, and somewhere in Switzerland, a 115-year-old woman keeps her secrets, knowing that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some questions better left unasked. Because the truth isn't always what sets us free. Sometimes the truth is what traps us forever. So what do you think really happened in that photograph? Was it a tragic case of childhood trauma manifesting in mysterious ways? Or did Eleanor truly capture something supernatural on camera that day in 1912? The fact that the photograph seemed to change over time, that every family reported similar experiences in that house, and that Eleanor lived with the consequences for over a century, it all points to something beyond our understanding. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most unsettling photographic mysteries, please leave a comment below. I love hearing your theories and thoughts on cases like these. What do you think was really watching Eleanor that day? And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next investigation into history's hidden mysteries. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that can't be explained, the ones that leave us questioning what's real and what lurks just beyond the edge of our perception. Until next time, keep questioning everything, and maybe think twice before looking too closely at old family photographs.